Hello fellow bike people, part 3 of the tune-up on this Norco XFR. Today we're doing the brakes. So as you can see, this one has disc brakes. These are by far the most common style these days. So I still hear people saying how they prefer rim brakes and they think these are just marketing gimmicks. They're honestly not. Selling a bike without disc brakes would be like selling a car with all 4 wheels having drum brakes. Sure, it would stop properly. It would do its job, but it wouldn't be anywhere near as effective or as efficient as these more modern systems. Now this isn't even the highest tech. This is still a cable-operated brake on this bike. The hydraulic brakes you can get, they're amazing. They're not so much about extra power as about being user-friendly. It's the fact you have complete control with only one finger on them. And that's a huge deal. I can't understate how important that is these days. But mechanical discs like this with a cable to operate them, they're still the more common option. And they are still incredibly effective, and I really think most bikes should have this type of brake. So, these brakes are pretty simple to understand. Even if you've never worked on them before, you can go and do it with a fair amount of confidence. Usually, the only tool you're going to need is a 5mm Allen key. So essentially, there's a brake pad on this side, in the inside of that caliper unit. There's a brake pad on the inside of this moving arm, and both of those just sandwich that spinning rotor back there. So, what you want to do is look at the brake from back here. Going directly in, you want to see a little light gap on either side of the rotor. Right in there. It's kind of hard to see with the camera like this, but there's a little light gap on either side. So now what you're trying to do is minimize that gap so everything's as close as possible to the rotor so you get a good solid lever feel, but without it being so close that anything touches the rotor and makes that grinding noise. That will not only slow you down, but cause some premature wear. So we're going to take a 5mm Allen key. Just going to reach it in the back. And turn that clockwise until one more turn would cause contact. And then for the cable side, you want to do the same thing. You can either loosen the cable here, pull it through, tighten that back up, or you can just use the barrel adjuster, which is just like the gears, and dialing that counterclockwise will add tension to the cable. And you're just going for minimal light gap on either side in there. Hear that? So the brake itself is adjusted perfectly there, but that noise you're hearing, that's a little bit of a warp in the rotor. So you can buy a proper bending tool for this, but a lot of the time those will put sharp kinks in it. And this might sound kind of counterintuitive, but I think the best way to straighten a rotor is just with your hands. The only thing you have to keep an eye on is that you don't get grease from the oils in your skin on the rotor, like on the braking surface, because that'll contaminate it. The natural oils in your skin will do that. So make sure your hands are really well washed before you do this. So looking down into the light gap so we can see where the warp is. Right there. Right there inside the caliper. That bit of the rotor is touching. So we're just gonna bend it back outwards. And rubbing's gone. Haha! See, that easy. And V-brakes, the other really common style. So rim brakes were how bicycle brakes were for basically since the invention of bicycles. Disc brakes are a fairly modern invention. These V-brakes, where it's 2 separate arms that run parallel to each other and have the cable running across, these were essentially the final generation of rim brakes before everybody switched over to discs. So these are pretty finicky as far as rim brakes go, but they give a fair amount of power. In dry conditions, they're pretty similar in terms of power to a mechanical disc brake. So for most people's purposes, you can't complain about these. In terms of adjusting them, the first thing to know is you very rarely actually have to adjust the bolt. There's a quick release system, so for getting the wheel in and out relatively easily, that just quickly and easily pops together. And in terms of adjusting it, for balance side to side, we've got these springs and the screws here. See the spring in here? It's mounted to a hole in the fork legs themselves. It goes up in here and pushes against the arm to push it away from the rim. To make it push further away from the rim, you tighten the screw inwards. That'll put more pressure on the spring and make that one arm move more. And the trick is to get it so both arms have very similar tension, so they're nice and balanced. There we go. Last thing to think of involving the brakes is what they actually feel like from the lever. So you want a fair amount of smoothness. You don't want any roughness in the cable, but that should be obvious. If you do get roughness in the cable and you don't have a replacement cable, try a little oil like Chain Lube in there, might actually help. The other thing is when setting the lever, you want this bit where your hand goes to be roughly parallel to the bar here. Some people prefer it slightly closer, some people prefer it slightly further away, but you want it roughly parallel to the bar for optimum leverage on the brake. Alright, so that's brakes. Next time we're going to look at the wheels and the bearings.